So good evening, everyone. How you doing tonight? Awesome. It's Wednesday, right? The middle of the week. You're supposed to be doing fabulous. And definitely because you came out tonight. I am Dr. Deborah Johnson Blake, aka Dr. DJ, and I'm going to be the event moderator tonight for the Gwinnett County 2045 Unified Plans Speak Up Community Education Speaker Series, number 3. And I see some of you, some familiar faces tonight who've been to number 1 and number 2. So thank you so much for coming to number 3. These series aim to enlighten Gwinnett County residents, leaders, and planning professionals, as well as professionals from beyond the county, about captivating and innovative concepts in community planning. I would like to express my gratitude to everyone involved in making this 3rd speaker series event a reality, so thank you so much. Housekeeping. Restrooms are to the right. Once you go out to the lobby, you make a right, and there are restrooms right down the hall for you. If you did not get an opportunity to sign in when you came into the venue tonight, please make sure you do that before you leave. I want to make sure we capture everyone who's here, make sure you get those updates and know what is going on. So tonight we have the pleasure of hosting 2 national experts who will delve into policy and planning solutions about connecting communities through redevelopment, directly related to Gwinnett County's local context and planning objectives. We are delighted to have all of you join us for this occasion. Now I would like to invite Director Matt Dickinson to the stage and extend his warm welcome and greetings. If you don't know Matt, he joined Gwinnett County's Planning and Development Department in 2021 and was promoted to the director in 2023. Prior to joining Gwinnett County, Matt served as Planning and Development Director for the City of Chamblee, Georgia, and an Associate Planner at Clark Patterson Lee and Associates. He has also served in leadership positions in the cities of Dunwoody, Johns Creek, and Suwanee. Please join me in welcoming Matt.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. It's great to see all these faces out. I did want to recognize District 2 Commissioner Ben Koo is here this evening. Is he in the room? He's in the back. So it's always good when you're having these discussions to have your decision makers in the room. So it's great to have him here so he can see all this great information we're going to receive tonight from these national speakers. The reason we're here and doing this speaker series is because we're in the process of updating our comprehensive plan. Currently, we have the 2040 Unified Plan. That was just created about 5 years ago, but as you know, if you're familiar with Gwinnett, a lot has changed in that short amount of time. So we were lucky enough to have the support from the Board of Commissioners to do a major update to that plan. So we wanted to have this speaker series to sort of set the tone and have some inspiration for what those plan recommendations are going to look like as we move forward. You probably know that there's not a lot of land left in Gwinnett County to develop. That's one thing in the past that a lesson we can learn from is that there's been a lot of low density sort of automobile oriented development in Gwinnett that has gobbled up a lot of the land. In fact, we think there's only less than 9% of the Gwinnett County's land area that is actually developable, and a lot of that has environmental constraints. So it's very important that we have a plan in place that considers preservation of that land, and at the same time that encourages redevelopment of a lot of our underutilized properties. So the speakers tonight are really going to hit that point and demonstrate why this is important, not only from a people-centered approach, but also from a financial perspective in terms of the tax benefits to the community and hopefully helping put a few dollars back in your pockets in the future. So that's all I have to say. So I will turn it back over to Dr. DJ, and she's going to introduce our first speaker. So again, thank you all for coming out.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. We appreciate your remarks and your service. Thank you. So now I have the pleasure of introducing our first speaker, and his name is Tony Jordan. He's the president of Parking Reform Network. Tony Jordan is on a mission to change how people think about parking policy. It started when he read Donald Shoup's book, The High Cost of Free Parking, in 2010, and used his experience as a labor organizer and software developer to build a coalition of Portlanders for parking reform. After successfully organizing local parking and land use reforms, Tony co-founded the Parking Reform Network in 2019. Its goal is to help people everywhere understand the impact of parking policy on climate change, equity, housing, and traffic. Tony now leads PRN's team of self-proclaimed parking nerds, working closely with his board of directors and advisory board. You can hear Tony speaking about parking reform regularly at local, regional, and national conferences. Some of his favorite speaking opportunities have been with Yimby Town, the Congress of the New Urbanism, Railvolution, Walk Bike Places, and the Strong Towns National Gathering, as well as the National Shared Mobility Summit, among others. Tony lives car-free. Did you hear me? Car-free in Portland, Oregon, with his wife, Davita, their 2 children, and their dog, Nova. Most of his spare time is developed to parking reform, but he does squeeze in the occasional multi-day bike trip or strategy board game. Please join me in welcoming Tony Jordan to the stage. Thanks, Tony.
Thank you. Let me move up here. Hello, thank you for having me here. It's great downtown. I'm going to talk to you about parking, specifically how not to park your way out of progress. So I want to kind of get a feel for what knowledge we have about parking policy in the room. If you don't have to be necessarily a shoepista, but if you know what this is, you might be one. Who's got some pretty high-level knowledge about parking policy? Raise your hand. Okay. Maybe you know a little bit about it. You've read an article recently. Maybe you've read a few chapters of this book, Paved Paradise by Henry Grabar. Anyone got like a little bit of parking knowledge? Okay. And then it's new to you. Of course, you park and you have opinions about how much parking should cost. Oh, this train. And where it should be, but you haven't really thought about how much it costs to build or why it exists there. Who's new to parking here? Okay. Well, a little warning, especially for people in those last 2 groups. What I'm going to tell you today might change your life a little bit. It certainly changed mine. As mentioned, I wasn't into parking. I'm not a planner until I read a blog post about this book by Donald Shoup in 2010 and got the book, and now I run a parking reform organization. It's a bit like if you've seen They Live, when Kurt Russell puts those glasses on and realizes that the world's being run by a group of alien monsters. Once you see the truth about parking policy, it's hard to forget it. I look out at parking lots now and I see piles of burning cash, or maybe the ghosts of what was there before, or the promise of what could be there afterwards. You might become someone who wants to spread the good news about parking policy at parties, dinners, but you're afraid maybe people will think you're weird. But I also would like to say that there is a growing number of people out there who understand this policy and feel passionately about it, and we throw great parties of our own. As mentioned, I had a great introduction, but I am a dad. I live in Portland. I ride a bike. I'm a rabble-rouser. We haven't had a car for a long time, but I do use one on occasion still. And I grew up in Los Angeles and went to school at Santa Cruz for a degree in politics before I worked as an organizer and in software. And then in 2019, I founded PRN. What is the Parking Reform Network? It is a nonprofit organization. We are international. We have about 500 members at this point around the globe, and hundreds more supporters. And we really are made up of planners, practitioners, activists, and community partners with a mission to educate the public about the impact of parking policy on the issues they care about. We have research products. We have a map of where cities have done reforms. We have a map of how much of cities are made up of parking lots, and other handbooks and guidance and messaging. But at our core, we're an advocacy organization focused on organizing. So we want to help people take action and accelerate these reforms. So why parking? Why did I get into this? Like, what is about it? And really, it was so profoundly impactful on issues I cared about. Parking costs so much and takes up so much space. And for many decades, we've required parking in every business and building that's been built in our communities. And the impact has been big. It's led to less housing, and the housing that is built is more expensive. It's led to sprawl that makes it difficult to ride a bike or walk, makes our streets unsafe for children. It has a host of environmental issues that come along with it. So it's a big problem, and I saw that there was no grassroots organizing around it. So I want to start by going to the kind of original sin here, parking mandates. So if you're not familiar, parking mandates are in almost every government's zoning code. There's a table or a list of sometimes very precise ratios of how much parking you need to build if you want to start a new business. So let's say you want to start a bowling alley here in the county. In the county, you need 1 per 300 square feet, 1 parking space for 300 square feet, or 1 for every 2 lanes in the alley. In Norcross, 4 per lane, twice as much. In Lawrenceville, 1 per 150 square feet. And a parking space takes up 300 to 400 square feet, so at this ratio, your parking lot is going to be twice as big as the building. In Duluth, 4.5 per lane, fairly specific. In Loganville, 5 per lane. Snellville, 1 per 200 square feet. And in Auburn, a minimum of 20 spaces for a bowling alley. What could justify this variety in parking ratios? Do people in the county carpool to bowl and people in Duluth don't? Does Loganville want to discourage new bowling alleys from being built and other places want to encourage it? Probably not. The fact is that these were probably made up pretty arbitrarily a long time ago, and no one's changed them since. Back in the 50s, when we started building a bunch of highways and there were more parking spaces at people's homes, architects and developers had to figure out where those cars were going to go. So this is a planning advisory service from 1954, where an architect from New York says, we'll never agree on how much parking should be provided for any given land use. And I just make some up. I put some parking there, and invariably, it's too much or too little. And for decades, planners have basically could be using tarot cards or reading bird guts to decide these ratios. Unfortunately, they got codified. They got put into the zoning code. They got put into a big book by the Institute of Traffic Engineers that everyone uses called parking generation to decide these numbers. And the result has been sprawl. These ratios are roughly right or precisely wrong. So to move a little bit out of here, we'll look at Woodbury, Georgia, which has, for a hospital, 4 spaces per bed plus 0.72 spaces per employee. 0.72, not 7.3, not 0.8, very specific. For a high school, 0.26 per student plus 1.2 per employee. And Woodbury it's a small place. I've looked at it on the map. It's got 2 helicopter-related land uses with specific parking ratios. Heliports and helistops. What's the difference? Hell if I know. Not to pick on Georgia. I went to North Carolina recently, found a number of parking requirements for drive-in movie theaters. So no one's building drive-in movie theaters anymore, but these requirements stay in the code. And if you were gonna build a drive-in theater, would you need to tell the proprietor that they need to have a parking space? In Washaba, Minnesota, we have a parking requirement for parking garages, 1 space per employee. So it's pretty crazy. My favorite is in SeaTac, Washington, which is basically an airport. There's a parking requirement for butterfly and moth breeding facilities. I've looked in the code. They don't have a requirement for ant farms or worm buckets. Now, these are ridiculous and they're arbitrary, but they're not a laughing matter. The impact is real. Decades and generations of these requirements have led to blown out spaces. Some people call them non-spaces. They're just where you're going from one place to another. It's a cycle of dependency where we've required so much parking, it's difficult to get there by any other mode, so more people drive, so then we have more parking we have to require, and we don't have any money to spend on anything else. how much does and this parking's not free, it costs a lot. So how much does a parking space cost? Not including the land. Does anyone have an idea? Anyone built a surface parking space? Shout it. $100? Oh, $2,500? Possibly. I mean, I go with mid-thousands, 5,000, 7,000. It kind of depends on the landscaping. So the numbers these are estimates because they really vary, but it's the thousands, single thousands. An above-ground parking space in a structure, some places will say you can build them for 20. I've seen them built for 60, 80,000, $100,000. So we'll go with 40,000, which is pretty middle of the road. And just if you've never known, $40,000 for a parking space requires about $400 a month in rents to pay for it. Underground parking, which a lot of people think is a solution to at least one of the space problems with parking, is about twice as much as an above ground space, sometimes 50%. But triple digit underground parking is not uncommon, and it gets more expensive the further down you go. Who pays for that, right? It's bundled into everything we have, and it's a trade-off we make between, do we want to house people and have businesses or store cars? So Stamford, Connecticut, stark example. Government built a 900 space parking garage by their train station. Cost about $88,000 per car. In the same town, and that's so someone can just drive a little less to work. They're still driving. In the same town, there's an affordable housing development. $9 million of initial investment, deeply affordable housing, doesn't require ongoing investment. 120 people live in that complex, $77,000 per person. So they could have built housing for over 1,000 people at the train station instead of storage for 900 something cars. It's a decision we're making. It shows our values and our priorities. The space is huge. I mentioned that a parking space takes up 300 to 400 square feet. That includes the aisles and the entryways. It's getting larger because our cars are getting bigger. It's kind of like the dark matter of urban planning, this parking. It pushes everything farther out, reduces your land values. Decades of this have led to so much parking. My organization, we did a survey of the 50 largest cities in the United States. Just our downtown areas, central cities. About 25% of your downtown is parking, the land use, not including the streets, but is either surface or structured parking in these places. And the central the central parts of these cities are often the best case scenario for commercial development. When you go out to more suburban areas, it's a much higher percentage. And many of these places actually don't require parking anymore. It just is really hard to dislodge once you have it. At 300 or 400 square feet per space, 1.5 or 2 parking spaces is the size of a fairly good sized apartment. And often the limiting factor to how much housing can be built on a parcel is not even the zoning code saying how many homes can be there or how big it can be. It's whether they can fit the parking that's required on the spot. So some examples locally, if you want to build multifamily housing here. Lilburn, 1 per unit, fairly reasonable. All the way up, similarly to the bowling alley, a bunch of different requirements, 1 per bedroom, 1.5 per unit, to Lawrenceville with 4 per dwelling. So if you think about the space that is required and that cost, you can understand how difficult it can be to build workforce housing, let alone affordable housing in communities, and to place them there. All this parking creates places where it's easy to drive to, but not a place where necessarily you want to be. We like the places like the picture at the top. I spent all last night here downtown, and it was wonderful. Not coincidentally, you don't have to have parking to open a business in these existing structures downtown Duluth. New construction, mostly the requirements lead it to look like the picture on the bottom. Takes up 10 times the amount of space. It's hot. It's no good people watching. It's not a place where we want to be. There's environmental impacts. Of course, driving has impacts, and adding more parking creates car dependency. But there are more local and specific impacts as well. Heating. I walked all the way around the mall, Gwinnett Place Mall, and it was hot. This asphalt soaks up heat, and it makes it hotter in the day and harder to get cool at night. And water is a big one, runoff, right? When you have rain and a bunch of impermeable surfaces, pollutes your rivers, lakes, and streams. Yeah. And it also causes flooding that leads to tremendous loss of property and life. This is a increasingly big problem for cities and counties and regions. They're spending hundreds of millions or billions of dollars to build subway-sized tunnels in a lot of places, not to transport people, but to move that water that falls on parking lots and other impermeable surfaces away. And that's a huge cost. The people who pay for that infrastructure are usually not the people who are driving in from elsewhere to park there. And speaking of driving, there's the traffic. A good friend of mine, Kathy Tuttle, says, roads are just really long driveways. And it's kind of true, right? Like a single parking space at your house doesn't really do any good. You need to expect that there's going to be a parking space at the grocery store and at the nail salon and at your school and wherever else you're going. I like to say that parking is like a battery for traffic. It stores it up and pushes it out on the street at a different time. So if you think about I ask people when they say we need more parking, is your traffic bad? Because there's no better way to create more traffic than to add a bunch of parking. And that's going to overload the road when the cars leave after the event or at the end of the day. And so eventually you end up needing to widen that road. So you have another one of these cycles. More parking, wider roads, less money for anything else. We got to pull the plug, short circuit it. Fortunately, there is a prescription for this. My mentor and friend, Professor Donald Shoup, has what he calls the Shoup dogma. It's a 3-step plan to fix this. Eliminate those parking mandates. Just get rid of them. They're illogical. They're not worth keeping around. Price your curbs. If you have public parking, price it. The lowest price that creates some occupancy so that people can get where they're going and they don't have to cruise around. And then any money you make from your public parking, use it to reduce car dependency by either making it more pleasant to walk from one place to another or investing directly in transit. The first one's happening. Cities around the country are eliminating their parking mandates. There's actually about 50 at this point now, and almost all in the last 5 or 6 years that have eliminated their parking mandates citywide. And these cities are in red states and blue states. They're in cold places and hot places. They're big places, big cities and small cities. If Arkansas and Bandera, Texas can get rid of, not Arkansas, Anchorage and Bandera, Texas can get rid of their parking mandates, any town can. It's more than minimums though, right? Getting rid of your parking mandates is like if you want to grow a garden and you remove the rocks and weeds from the place where you want to grow it. That doesn't lead to vegetables and flowers growing in that spot. You have to plant something, you have to plant seeds, you have to encourage growth that you like. That's your zoning, and how you're incentivizing development on these places. You have to nourish those plants by watering them. In this case, you have to get people there, hopefully without driving, because all those cars are going to choke out the development. That parking's going to spread it out and make it not work the way that you want to create the places where I think people want to be. So you have to do these additional things. To that, I say cities should mind their own business when it comes to parking. Your planning department is often telling every entrepreneur or every developer how much parking they need to build for their customers and tenants. Meanwhile, the transportation department is giving the same product away on the street for free. If the city or the county or whoever owns the parking prices that parking appropriately when there is demand for it, then there's not an incentive to quote, dump that problem onto the public. There's no tragedy of the commons. If you're managing the public parking, then it sends a signal to the developers and to the entrepreneurs and the business owners that if they feel that they need parking for their customers and tenants, they can lease or build it. And and same for the tenants and the customers themselves. They'll have the information they need to know about what mode they want to take and whether they want to own a car or rent a place somewhere where that's not necessary. So what happens when you do these things? It's a little bit new, right? Most of these reforms have happened in the last 5 or 6 years. So there's not a ton of examples to look back on directly, but we do have a few. One thing we know everywhere is the day after you get rid of your parking mandates, it's the same place it was the day before. Eliminating your parking mandates does not eliminate parking, and it doesn't ban new parking from being built. So if people are used to driving somewhere, they can still do that. Those places are still the same. It's going to take a long time for the city to change. People will complain. Where are they going to park? I mean, well, there's usually actually pretty ample parking when you look. These concerns are to be taken seriously, but often they're a cover for other concerns that people might have. In the examples we do have, there's two good ones that Sightline Institute has studied recently. Seattle got rid of parking mandates near transit in 2012, and Buffalo got rid of parking mandates citywide in 2017. In both places, most of the development that happened after those rules still contained parking. It contained less parking than before. In fact, most of the housing that was built in those two cities after their reforms would have been illegal under the previous rules, but they still built some parking because the people building it have an investment. Building these buildings have an investment, and they want to make sure that they can put tenants in those buildings. But making these reforms unlocks tremendous potential. One huge thing is shared parking, right? When you have a place with a lot of parking, if you remove these rules, it allows businesses to either to share that parking in a way they couldn't before. Under most zoning codes, the parking is an exclusive use. So if you have a bank that has a prescribed amount of parking, it can't rent that to a restaurant can't use that as a reason not to build parking when it opens. Or an office can't lease its parking to the residents of a new apartment building. So you unlock this ability to use what you have more efficiently. It also, when we're doing these kinds of developments incrementally and on the margins, it increases over time the ridership available for transit improvements to support that transit and can create revenue to support that transit as well. There are concerns people have, and they're valid. It's not equitable, they'll say. Like, it's not fair to charge low-income people or people who depend on their cars for parking. Budgets can be tight, but I think we should look at the status quo and whether that's equitable as it is now. Most of the benefits of the current system requiring parking everywhere accrue to higher income, wealthier households. They own more cars and they drive more. People do own cars and drive in lower income households, but they own fewer cars. So when we think back to that slide showing the parking ratios, and if you're requiring 2 parking spaces per home, but your average low income household might only own 1 car, then they're having to pay for another space that they might not need. And a lot of people actually can't afford cars or don't drive for other reasons. And so you're leaving them out in the cold. And people who are taking transit are impacted by all this existing requirements because it leads to more traffic that slows down or makes their trips less safe. Similarly, aging and disability are big concerns. I don't speak for those communities, but I have spoken to people from them. We did a great webinar back in October. You can find it on YouTube. Where we had a representative from the AARP, someone from Disability Rights Washington, and a couple local disability justice advocates. And the main takeaway from this is that similar to low-income households, these aren't monolithic communities. Some people prefer to drive or have access to vehicles to drive, and many of them do not for various reasons. As people age, a lot of people get their license taken away, and they end up being isolated and dependent. There's trade-offs when we provide access for cars as opposed to thinking about how people access a place. So you may have 1 or 2 spaces for a van to park, but then anyone taking transit or coming down the sidewalk or walking in from another mode is going to be impacted by that curb cut or farther away from where they need to go. And it's also interesting that a lot of times this comes up when we're talking about parking. How is someone going to get to the building? But we aren't often as concerned about what people do once they get there. Can they use a bathroom with a wheelchair? Can they get to the upper floors? Is the place actually accessible? And of course, there's the chicken and egg, the transit's not good enough. Like, we can do this once we have good transit, but until then, we can't reform our parking rules or our land use rules. And I think key there really is it's kind of oil and water, right? You're not going to build that transit if you're still digging your hole deeper on your parking mandates and your automobile-centric infrastructure today. These are incremental changes again. very little of a city redevelops or an area redevelops in any given year. And so you're really providing the opportunity by doing these reforms to allow a fraction of that development to happen that's oriented towards other modes in any given year. And over time then you start to build what I think of as development oriented towards transit instead of waiting for the transit to be there to build around. So fortunately, there are direct other benefits that can happen from reforming these parking. The solution is in the sites around here. I spent all day walking around around the mall, and I have this slide. I asked Professor Shoup for these slides he uses in his presentation. This is Cisco Systems headquarters in Silicon Valley. And he has a series of slides where he shows this, and he shows that throughout the year this parking lot is not used very much, and he proposes to just build a bunch of housing around it, build mixed use around the edges of it. Activates the street, leads to higher property tax and sales tax revenues. It provides housing for the employment area, and it's not displacing anyone, right? It's being built on a parking lot. You can't really gentrify a parking lot. I was going to use all those slides, and then I came across this plan one of the plans to redevelop Gwinnett Place Mall, and I think this is great, but this is also a mega project. This is, I saw the timeline for this is 20 years. It's going to require a lot of changes around the rules to that site specifically. It's good, and you should make those changes to make this possible, but don't stop there, right? Don't require that the county shouldn't have a monopoly on redeveloping parking lots. There are a lot of parking lots that are smaller than that one, and they could potentially redevelop as well. They could, you could build a vernacular or a group of developers who know and have experience redeveloping on these sites by allowing it to happen at smaller capacities. Getting rid of your parking mandates also and managing your on-street parking also allows for middle housing to occur. That type of infill that could be in your lower density areas. An ADU here or there, an ADU here, a garage apartment there, somewhere where a grandmother or a child or an in-law can live, strengthening your community, reducing your overall infrastructure costs, and eventually maybe building enough density that it makes sense to run a bus down a nearby street. And also, these requirements get in the way of economic development and entrepreneurship. So removing these requirements may allow people to start businesses that are closer to where people live, even in lower density areas. Or you might experiment with accessory commercial units, where you allow someone to start a small business in their garage and serve just the neighborhood with a nail salon or a corner store. And none of these things are going to make it so no one needs a car anymore, but we can reduce certain numbers of trips and create nodes where the communities are a little bit more walkable and sustainable. So I would like to encourage this plan to not let parking get in the way of progress. Recognize that all this parking does cause issues, and eliminate your parking mandates, manage your on-street parking, and reinvest in walkability and transit. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tony. Before you leave the stage, how long have you been without a car?
Since 2008.
2008. Absolutely awesome. So you just heard from Tony, the rabble rouser. Can you tell the audience what that is? What does that mean?
It's an agitator, right? Yeah. It's stirring up. It's stirring up trouble, I think, is what I think of it.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your insight tonight, but I do have a real serious question I want to ask you before we get to the next speaker. Some places have used transit or trail planning to spur redevelopment and growth. Given its suburban context, what advice would you have for Gwinnett about pursuing this kind of redevelopment?
I think I mentioned in my talk, and I do think this is true, that you can try to plan. Yeah, you should absolutely make plans for how people can get around. But I think there's also something to be said about allowing things to happen somewhat organically. So some of this is the desire to prescribe where people are going to walk or where they're going to take transit versus legalizing the kind of development you want to see and seeing where people decide to build it and then connecting it after the fact. That said, I mean, I do think you should expect a minimum amount of ability to get somewhere without driving. When I went to the mall, I looked and it was 3 miles away, which I walked 3 miles around the mall. I might have walked down that way, but there was no way to get there. It was physically impossible. So I do think like you do need to connect these nodes together, absolutely. But I also think a lot of the planning is kind of like, it's similar to when you're setting the ratios on the parking mandates. You're trying to guess or force something to happen. And I think that there's a lot to be said about, you know, incremental development, which I'm pretty sure we're going to hear about some next from Joe, and just letting things happen organically.
Awesome. Thank you for that. You will be able to ask questions after our next speaker, but I wanted to make sure that I asked Tony that right now. And commercial notation here, just a little break. If you missed the first 2 speaker series, guess what? They are available on YouTube right now. Or you can go to Gwinnett County's 2045 Unified Plan website. So please, please watch it, spread the word, let your friends, your neighbors, your colleagues know who live in Gwinnett County what's going on so they can be a part of this discussion. Awesome. I am getting ready to introduce our next speaker, and I'm excited. Joe Minicozzi. Joe Minicozzi, AICP, is the principal of Urban3. Prior to creating Urban3, he served as the executive director for the Asheville Downtown Association. Joe is an urban planner, imagining new ways to think about and visualize land use, urban design, and economics. Joe founded Urban3 to explain and visualize market dynamics created by tax and land use policies. He holds a Bachelor of Architecture from the University of Miami and a Master of Architecture and Urban Design from Harvard University. In 2017, Joe was recognized as one of the 100 most influential urbanists ever. Before moving to Asheville, he was a primary administrator of the form-based code for the downtown West Palm Beach, Florida. Joe's cross-training in city planning and the public and private sectors, as well as private sector real estate finance, has allowed him to develop award-winning analytical tools that have garnered national attention in the Wall Street Journal, Planning, New Urban News, Realtor, Atlantic Cities, and the Center for Clean Air Policy's Growing Wealthier report. Joe is a sought-after lecturer on city planning issues. His work has been featured at the Congress for New Urbanism, the American Planning Association, the International Association of Assessing Officers, and New Partners for Smart Growth conferences as a paradigm shift for thinking about development patterns. Joe is a founding member of the Asheville Design Center, a nonprofit community design center dedicated to creating livable communities across Western North Carolina. Please join me in welcoming Joe to the stage. Thank you, Joe. Awesome. You have your clicker. All right.
Okay, is my mic light? Ooh, it's hot. Cool. Thank you, Dr. TJ. I've got to edit my bio down. It's like way too long. So thanks for letting me be here. Thanks for letting me be part of this. For y'all, you might want to move over. This is going to be a highly visual show. You're not going to see much from over there. Who's seen me present here? This is like the 5th time I've been in Gwinnett County. Okay, cool. So no shouting out the answers. I'm watching you. I want to give you all a quick little test about how we perceive data or how we think about things. So for those of you that have seen me before, don't shout out the answer, but for the rest of you, I'll give you 5 seconds to tell me how many shapes you see in this kid's puzzle. It's a quick little test. There's going to be no failure. Just tell me how many shapes you see in this kid's puzzle. Ready, go. Okay, who's got the answer? Shout it out. Would you say 80? 18, okay. Anybody else? I can't hear you. Shout it out. 8. Anybody want to go higher than 18? Anyone? 20. All right, overachiever in the back row. How many kids were on the bus? What time was it on the clock? So y'all didn't see that because I didn't ask you that question. Our brains perceive information based on how it's steered. So if I ask you the question about where's everybody going to park, we're going to focus on parking. If I ask you how many shapes you are, or you see, you're not going to look at the kids. You're not going to see that there's 5 kids on the bus or that it was 10 after 10 on the clock, right? I didn't ask you that question. As we go into a planning process, be aware of the questions that you predispose a planning process to be, but also the questions that are put before you and how you look at data. So let's just take a little ride differently into some stuff. I'm from Asheville, North Carolina. I'm sure that many of y'all have been to Asheville. Show of hands. Cool. Thanks for drinking our beer. Asheville is not too far from here. And you know the setting, beautiful area, bluegrass music. We got 40 breweries in our town, which is a lot. And like any quirky little mountain town, we have men dressed as nuns on tall bikes that eat fire. It's your typical little place, right? Well, Asheville didn't start that way. This is Asheville from the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. Did you come visit this Asheville? That's a 1996 Chevy Celebrity. We were flat on our face, dead as a doornail as a city. We had this attitude that we weren't urban. We didn't want to be a city. We're rural mountain people. I worked for this guy's company. This is Julian Price. He started a for-profit real estate development company. Our job was putting his portfolio to work. 75% of the money went into fixing buildings. 25% was in seeding entrepreneurs, getting businesses started. But we found ourselves doing is the typical stuff. You buy this building, you take off the skin, and turn this into apartments. This is the Malaprops bookstore that we've helped grow up. And we found ourselves constantly talking to the community. In Asheville, I like to joke that we have both kinds of people. We have hippies and rednecks, and not a whole lot in between. So we have this polarized way of talking about things. And if you're a real estate developer in that world, you're evil. All developers are evil on the left, and on the right, because we're doing downtown development, we're somehow subsidized. And we had to communicate to both sides of the aisle. And when we talk about buildings, we're talking about them the same way farmers talk about them, as crops. Buildings sit on land, right? When we talk to farmers, farmers talk about the crop yield per acre, the water per acre, the labor per acre. So this is one of the buildings that we were accused of being subsidized because the city built the streetscape. So thank you, city, for the garbage can, the bike rack, 2 benches, and a street tree. We put in retail, office, and residential. So we took the building's value from $300,000 to $11 million. So what you got out in the community was 3,500% more taxes off our work. How about a thank you card? How about a box of chocolates? It's not money we're getting. This is money y'all get. To go out and buy 3,500% more garbage cans, we don't care, right? And again, the bias. People would say, well, Joe, that's $11 million. This Walmart is $20 million. Fair enough. Right? That's double the value, right? But it took 34 acres of my community to make that happen versus our 0.2 acres. So if you just look at the gross value, you're missing the point of potency. So rather than total value, this is the value per acre, or the taxes per acre, of our building versus the Walmart, sales taxes per acre, residents per acre, jobs per acre. So if you could build wealth in your community, which would you do? The right side or the left side of this chart? You want to do the right side, so you want to facilitate that type of growth. I want you to realize this isn't complex math that I'm doing here. I don't have a finance degree. I'm not a mathematician. This is 5th grade division. When we talk about things with metrics, you're familiar with talking about cars. Could y'all imagine if we're sitting out at the lobby and I say, my truck gets 650 miles per tank? You'd laugh at me. You'd be like, Joe, come on, that's stupid. All tanks are different sizes. We measure it by the gallon. The numbers just changed. And we should all be driving BMW at 70 miles per gallon. We do this for a $3 commodity. Why aren't you doing it for $1 million commodity? Why don't we look at this stuff in an apples to apples way? So the city is essentially a finite boundary of land. My city cannot annex land until 2026. Thank you, state of North Carolina. So those acres are all that we have. And if you think of what we are as a real estate developer and then read maybe the Oxford American Dictionary, it says to constitute a company, a city, or other organization as a legal corporation. So by law, My city of Asheville is a really big incorporated government, right? Our government is a corporation. Your city, your county, your state, your country. Joe Biden said this on the Stephen Colbert Show. The United States is the largest corporation in the world. I'm such a nerd for any lawyers in the audience. That's the US code on the bottom of the slide right there that lists us as a federal corporation. This is how our government works. So we should understand the tax flow. We should understand how it pays for itself. My city is 7 times the value of Ted Turner. Do you think Ted Turner is just going to look at Facebook every single damn day? Of course not. He's going to look at data. He's going to see how the shows are performing. He's going to make informed decisions based on the cash flow of his business. If we're 7 times the value of Ted Turner, shouldn't we be doing the same? Do y'all know my mayor? She doesn't do it, but I ask her. Doing this all across the country, we've done this in 40 states now. You mash up all of our data. For every $1 of taxes somebody in the unincorporated county is paying in single-family taxes to the county, their brother or sister in the prime city is paying about 5 times that. Here's the Walmart, there's the mall. This is a 2-story building, a 3-story building, and a 6-story building. As you stack your stories, you're stacking your dollar bills. It's real simple. This is true in Driggs, Idaho, Durham, North Carolina, or Dallas. When some people see this data, they're like, what's your problem? You just hate Walmart. And I'm just going to be honest with you for a second. So I presented at the International Association of Assessing Officers. Is there a tax assessor in the audience here? Does anybody hang out with tax assessors? Could you imagine 3,000 of them? It makes a planning conference feel like Burning Man. It was like the squarest thing I've ever been to. This guy gets up at 8 in the morning and does this amazing presentation about how cheap Walmarts are. Let that wash over you for a second. I'm sitting there drinking my coffee. I'm like, this is awesome. How efficient is that? One meeting, 3,000 assessors, he's getting all of his property taxes lowered in one meeting. Now, I'm trained as an architect, so I'm having a coronary. I also used to work in government, and I'm like, why doesn't anybody care about this? This is crazy. So I went up to the microphone, and I asked him, I said, Mr. Terrell, what's the useful life of one of your buildings? And he said, 15, 20 years. We designed the building to depreciate as fast as possible, crater it. We'll build another one and let it depreciate down again. We don't care about the buildings. They're throwaway. Cool. From the mouth of babes. So for you, is it worth it for your corporation to have a 15-year relationship? Is that acceptable to you? It clearly is if you go around Gwinnett County and you see the suburban area that is all cratering around you. You've bought into that deal. Their relationship with your community is the life cycle of a cat. We at least mourn the passing of the cat, right? Anybody cry when the mall goes dark? No. So this is what happens in every community. Again, don't hate the player, hate the game. But you better know that damn game and know how it's being played, right? I want to thank Brooke for this graphic. Thank you, Brooke. We have to make jokes over this stuff or else we'll start crying. This is how the world works. I would say that people don't see it because we're not asking the right questions. We're also not seeing the data in a certain way. So if I can show you your brain, and I could show you your brainstem activity in blue versus your creative thought process in green, right? This is not mysticism when we go get an MRI. Can I do an economic MRI of your place? So back to my county. I've got 2 voters out in the county for every 1 voter in the city in Buncombe County. My state legislator called us the cesspool of sin when I was on the Downtown Association. Like, how do you handle that? So, we sent a reporter up to talk to him, and he doubled down and said, well, it's not the good people of Buncombe County, it's that downtown place. That's where the freaks and weirdos are. That's a cesspool. So we threw a street party. What can you do? But we made this model to talk to people out in the county. So this is, gray is non-taxable, green is low value, purple is high value. So this is low value. This is the Biltmore estate, that big purple splotch right there. That one property, that one house is worth $100 million. Pretty cool, right? $100 million house. Y'all got one of those? It's also a 180,000 square foot house sitting on 8,000 acres of land. Y'all got a 180,000 square foot house? How about a 120,000 square foot house? Of course not. So this is like the biggest gas tank. Rather than total value, here's value per acre. And why not stop here? Let's go show it to you in 3D. Same map, shown it to you a different way. Using that Z dimension, that vertical dimension to show you this, what does it mean to jump from one color to the other? So we can see the low value out here. And again, for my friends that live out here in Fairview, They don't know. They don't know what the tax flow is like. They think they're paying a lot of taxes because they know somebody further out here and they saw their tax bill. They have no idea what we pay in county taxes. We're all in this together. So if we're all paying 6 mils, think of a 6 mil thick blanket thrown across this model. Where's all the money coming from? That big purple thing. What do you think that is? It's downtown Asheville. We can also see our little cousin of Black Mountain. We can see its little downtown popping up here. And we can see how low value the sprawl is. Truth in the data. Show people the information and don't just talk about it. 10 years ago when I did this, everybody's like, well, that's different. That's Asheville. We're different. It's like, all right, well, here's Kansas City. Notice the problem. Here's Bozeman. Can you tell me where downtown is? Here's Manchester, New Hampshire. Y'all see a pattern yet? Here's Brevard, North Carolina. Little old Brevard. The mayor's name is Mayor Jimmy. As soon as Mayor Jimmy saw it, he's like, well, I can tell where the money's coming from. Good job. So, and if you read Strong Towns, this is what streets produce. This is what a road produce. So you have all that linear road with very little revenue coming off of it. This is spatial analysis. I know this joke doesn't work for people under the age of 35, but this is what we do. And I, when I did, sorry, Gwinnett County, you all are actually a bit of mine now, because when I came here 10 years ago, I was instructed or asked, when I did the model here, I couldn't use 4 words in Gwinnett County when I showed up. These are dirty words. I couldn't say the word urban, city, town, or municipal. Y'all told me that. Now I was polite, and I was like, okay, whatever, I won't use those words. What do you do when your company's called Urban3, by the way? Do I just say I'm 3? So Kelly Brownlow was our client, Chamber of Commerce. Kelly's awesome. I called up Kelly. I was like, y'all are 812,000 people back then. You're more than that now. And she goes, yeah, but look, honey, we're like outside the Beltway. We're out here. We're 460 square miles. We're huge. These numbers are old, but I wanted to make a point. So I was doing a presentation the night before the public presentation, and it was all community leaders. And I said, all right, let me show you some math here. Each of these people is 100 people. So the density of Gwinnett County is 1,900 people per square mile, right? Divide the people into the area, which is less dense than DeKalb. Y'all know DeKalb. We had all this other data, so I showed it to them. I said, this is kind of mind-blowing to me. Could y'all tell me what's in Mecklenburg, North Carolina? Charlotte. How the hell did you all get denser than Mecklenburg and you didn't produce a Charlotte? This is Nashville. Both of these places have professional football teams. Is there such thing as the Swanee Cowboys or something that I missed here? How did you do this? This is Austin, you're double their density. Raleigh, Asheville, Chapel Hill, North Carolina. This is what rural looks like. That ain't rural. So as we're doing your model, Josh McCarty was doing, I was like, Josh, could you turn that on its side? It looks like a 1970s shag carpet. It's like the same thing from end to end. The reason why I was freaked out is this is what we typically see. I could see 3 different places and I could see their downtowns popping up. What did you all do here? These are choices that you all made. So this is the most potent building in 10 years ago in your entire county. You have done nothing to achieve a value more potent than that. So all of these places are less dense and producing more wealth at the peak of their market versus y'all. This is choice. Y'all made this. So just to rub it in a little bit, we made an economic heart monitor, putting the 3 counties at the same scale and pulsing them out. And there you go. So this is Davidson County, Travis County, and Gwinnett County, peak value of 192. Less dense Austin was 476 million an acre, and y'all are flatlining at 8. The response was priceless. And one of the county commissioners said to me, but we're not urban. And I said I never used that word in the entire presentation. And she's like, but we're not urban. I was like, I heard that. So you have all of the same horizontal infrastructure here. So see, look, the width of this versus the width of that. You're maybe a little bit smaller than Travis County. You have all that horizontal infrastructure, none of the vertical stuff. I said, are you guys going broke yet? And she's like, oh yeah, we're broke. Go figure. These are choices that were made that you're now living with. You have to make different choices going forward, but it's also going to be more costly, period. You put your infrastructure down. By the way, I showed that in Johns Creek, y'all know Johns Creek, they got a kick out of you all. They're like, oh, those people in Gwinnett County, they're just so crazy. And I was like, all right, well, here's Fulton County. There's Johns Creek right there. I was like, how are y'all any different? One of the guys in the audience wanted to argue with me, and I'm like, that's just data. I mean, you don't look any different to me. This delusion that we get in when we talk about cities, this is Johns Creek, this is Asheville. By the way, our Asheville, our color, our purples start way past theirs. So Johns Creek's are at $2 million. Ours start at 20 million. So if we're going to color our color ramp like Johns Creek, this is how much more potency we have over Johns Creek. Let's put them side by side. This blew my mind. We are the same population as Johns Creek. Did y'all know that? Do you go spend your weekends in Johns Creek? This is the area, so this is the density. Johns Creek is double the density of Asheville. The peak value is only 6.5 million. We're at 47 million. We're actually more than that now. And the total potency, Johns Creek is $10 billion. We're $14 billion. We have $4 billion more wealth on the same population. What the hell did they do? I know some of you might live in Johns Creek, sorry, but you know what I'm saying? So this is Johns Creek at the same scale as Asheville, looking at the side view, and this is Charlotte, same density is Johns Creek, and you can see the peak value differences. We make choices on how we build our wealth, and these choices are laid into our landscape. So the other thing to think about, this is Fulton County and a little bit of DeKalb shoved on it, but look at Serenbe out there. So I know that this is a project to think about out in the county. Serenbe made different choices in its land pattern, and you can see its different values right there. This is something y'all can drive and go take a look at. How do you do a potent little village? And it's all by design. So the position that you're in now is you've essentially put all your furniture in your house, and now you have to decide on where you're going to put your carpeting in. It's not going to be easy. You have to think of different ways to do this. This isn't the time for doing that first wave of planning, you've missed it. So those are choices that were made by your predecessors, and that happened. So now you have to do different things. Just for fun, I put your downtown at the same scale as my downtown. We're 3 times the population, but we're also 4 times the area. So our density is actually less. So Duluth, you're actually more dense than Asheville. But notice the fine grain of streets in our downtown versus how much y'all have. In your core areas, in your community, in your county, you're going to have that problem. A lot of your towns have train lines running through it or really weird Georgia DOT infrastructure that makes your pattern hard to deal with. So that's one issue. Oh, by the way, we also made a mistake. I was supposed to stay in the Marriott across the street. I ended up getting stuck in the Marriott out by the mall, so it's kind of fun for me. But being out at the mall, look at that land area of the mall. I just went ahead and just dropped it on top of Duluth. It's amazing how big those parcels are. Again, that's a different approach. You're going to have to handle that differently. You saw the plan that Tony showed. That's one way of handling it. But you have to be patient about this, and you have to ask different questions. But zooming in, just for the heck of it, last night I went and ate some Korean over here. It's awesome. You guys have great food all over the place. This is Venezuelan. But you think of the walk that I had to do out there just to get to 2 restaurants. If I was in the downtown, how much more area I'd covered in the process. The scale of how the block structure is out there is alarmingly large. And to be a pedestrian, you've got to break that down. And guess what? That's going to cost money. It's going to be building streets. In cities that we talk with, lots of times they have this delusion or this mirage of money because they're growing. And growing doesn't necessarily connote wealth. It connotes spending. So Lancaster, California was up and over the mountain from Los Angeles. It's a suburb. Here it is. They should have a bigger purple mountain in their downtown. What's kind of phenomenal to me is they have 953 miles of roads. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know what a mile looks like, so we put it on a map. They have enough roads to go from Los Angeles to Portland, so they can build a road to Tony. Every 30 years, they have to rebuild that road. All of your public roads, drive around and you'll see the tar alligatoring on the roads. That's a sign of their collapse. They have to be replaced, which means you all have to reach in your pocket and pay for them. I, as a developer, build the roads and give them to you. They're yours forever at that point. And what your city does is in your county, too, all municipal finance officers list roads as assets. Did you all know that? So in my business, I've got a computer, it's an asset, I have a delivery van, or I have a piece of real estate. Those are all assets. I could sell you the building, the van, and the computer. Can Duluth sell their roads to Norcross? No. They're stuck with them, they're liabilities. We just don't look at them the right way. And in defense of your government officials, they're just accepting standards that were handed to them. They're not really thinking through what the problems are. So here's when they built all of their roads. And you can see here, in 1953, all of those roads that they built, well, guess what? 30 years later, they had to rebuild those. And when they were rebuilding those roads, they had to get more tax dollars to pay for that rebuild, right? Have you heard this story before? So you can see the amount of roads that they rebuilt by annexing more land and doing more suburban development. This comes back with build number 2 and brings along with it the new stuff. Think about your cycle in time and when all of your roads went down. Think about the 1990s and what happened in the county, and then flash forward 50 years for you all. There are 30 years in the desert. Your roads will last a little bit longer. But that's going to be your rebuild cycle. That's when you're going to be hit with a huge capital call. So this is what their build-rebuild schedule looks like over time. And you can look back at this and see how stupid that first wave was. And read any literature from the 1950s. No one was thinking of the long-term effects of this stuff. And there's a little bit of racism that was going on with this too, with white flight. Then they doubled down on this in the 1980s because we convinced ourselves, hey, Tony, we all have cars. You don't, but you're a fool. We all have cars. We need to have roads, right? We just told ourselves, this is America. All Americans have cars. And we doubled down on it, and now it's getting bigger and bigger. The scariest thing about this model is we didn't put in inflation of the cost of asphalt. Just last year alone, asphalt went up 29% in 1 year. Can we afford this going forward? So flushing their money into the system, they could afford about 50% of their roads. That's the reality of the situation that they're in. And they're not alone. Roads are forever. Thank you, Brooke. We couldn't leave De Beers alone. Okay, I know this is depressing. There is a way out. Eugene, Oregon, this is their revenue model. You can see University of Oregon right there. They have a little college town. This is the downtown. This is floating the whole city into a lake and looking at the revenue coming out of the water and the sunk costs under the water. So you choose to live out there, great. Tony made a choice. Good job, Tony. This is what you cost society for your choice. So let's be honest with the citizens and let people know what it costs for them to live where they live. Give people the information. And if you net, again, corporations do this, if you net your revenue against your expense, you have what's in the black is what's net positive, what's in the red is net negative. Here's the positive view of the city from above the ground. If you pull this thing up in the air like you're looking for a salamander under a rock, you can see the spread of subsidy across the model. We need to be doing this in every community so we understand what's going on and we can make better choices. So this is their... Did a lot of study in the city, but this is basically what it results to. I call this the Brady Bunch slide. It's like residential, low density, medium density, high density, commercial, or mixed use, low, medium, high, commercial, low, medium, high, and these are the resulting sticker prices of all of these building types. This is the reality of what this community's gotten themselves into. Now, I know there's politics when I put this up, because the first reaction from the community is, I'm just pointing out that, is it truly a market choice if the government is paying you to live in a single-family detached house, right? That's the reality of those numbers. And I'm going to hear back from the people in Eugene, hey, Joe, I want a house. Great. I want a full head of hair. I think you all should pay for it. Like, what kind of nonsense is that? But that's how we allow our political process, again, thank you, Brooke, to do. They have 80% of their land use in single-family detached. You can't carry that much cost. I'm not saying you can't live in a single-family house. I'm saying let's pencil it out, make sure we can afford it. Let's balance out the other sections. You can't have, if you see the city like a tree ring, you can't have one tree ring being 80%. It's just not going to work. So definitely do more stuff downtown. Prioritize that. Your plan should focus on that and make sure you're doing everything you can to get that done. Do as Tony says, get the barriers out of the way to get some of that development to happen. But also, if you look up here, this thing called Crescent Village, find 5 more spots for that. Do whatever you can to get that moving fast forward so that you can get wealth, so that you can continue what's going on. And while we were doing this analysis, we had to build this really crazy complex model, and I just want to show you what choice means. Tony talked about stormwater. So there are about 3 square miles of roads. If you take all of the roads in the entire city and squeeze them together into a parking lot, that's the land area size. When we were sitting down with the engineer, I said to him, you've got a road from Eugene to San Francisco. How much does the city pay in stormwater fees? Do you know what your cities pay? Nothing. I'm like, really? So if I'm a developer and come in and build a 3 square mile parking lot, you're not going to charge me for it? And he's like, no, you're different, you're a developer. I'm like, how? Rain can't go through a street. So shouldn't the community be aware of the cost of all of those streets and what you have to carry for that stormwater? So let's go through the same experiment in a different way. This is the city. Let's squeeze the city to a square. That's the city as a land area. And as Tony talked about here, the impervious surfaces. So we had to measure these. Notice how parking and roads are about the same area. Here's the subsidy that goes to parking. Roads cost you $600 million for the roads. You're only assessing the parking at $245. They're the same damn land area, so why are you giving a discount to parking? These are questions we need to ask. It's not free parking. We found other ways to tweak the system. I just want you to see what they are. All the stuff that we love, your berms, buffers, backyards, very little value there. All of our value is in the buildings at $1.6 billion. So we figured out their stormwater to be about $440 million. If you went out and built your stormwater system today, that's the cost. And the engineer was like, yes. I said, so follow me on a thought experiment. Let's have the same square footage of buildings. Let's just have more 2-story buildings. You know, so we have the same area, less footprint, right? That reduces the stormwater because rain can now go to the ground. If I can get the buildings closer together and have less parking and roads, doesn't that cut the stormwater system in half? You follow me? So I just saved you $222 million because you only have a $222 million stormwater system versus a 444. What if we had the choice to vote 20 years ago and say, what's the best way to spend $222 million? Would you choose to stretch your city out, or would you choose to send every child in your county to Harvard for a summer program? What would you choose with $222 million? Were we ever given that choice? Or Princeton, or Emory, I don't care. Have a better after-school program, solve for homelessness. Why aren't we given these choices? Instead, we're extractive on ourselves without being told what the true penalty is. These are choices. Our government is set up a certain way, and we're in a new era. We have these little computers that we carry around. We can see data differently. We should be asking for these things. And just to close with, I'll have this whole thing as a PDF so you can have it. Indianapolis, we were doing a project there. Here's Indy. We were working on this transit line called the Blue Line. Our client was a transit system, and we had to go in and work with the city, but the city had some barriers in the way. So here's Indianapolis. This is their parking. So they have about 42% of their land is in buildings, 27% in parking, and here's how it works out on the financial side. Same deal as we did for Portland. So they have a pretty same deal of parking and roads are about the same size. Here's their financial side. Way bigger subsidy to the parking than what you saw earlier, but still the subsidy exists. Notice how much of their budget is being created by the buildings and how little area it takes compared to everything else. These are numbers that you should be running for your community so that you're conscious of what your costs are in your community. So we did the same thing for the transit corridor. Let's drop downtown out. So all of these are a little walk shed, a little radius from the bus stop out of about 5 minutes. Here's the data. You probably don't remember downtown, the whole city, so let's bring that back. This blew my mind. They actually have more land dedicated to surface parking in the middle of the city in their bus corridor than they do countywide in Marion County, Indiana. That's mind-blowing to me. So here's what happens. Tony talked about this earlier. When you go out and build this stuff, or worse, require it, these are their numbers in Marion County. Here's Marion, there she is. She's got about 1,200 square feet of buildings, 800 square feet of parking dedicated to her countywide, and about 900 square feet of roads. When this gets built, this is what it converts to in your cash sheet or your balance sheet. The buildings are about $52 a square foot. Your parking's about 75 cents a square foot. Your roads are going to cost you $22 a square foot in front of the building and in front of the parking, right? The roads don't care what it's going in front of. Notice the revenue difference when you apply a tax to this. This number is 71 times less than that number. So just for fun, we took half the property taxes and put it into a road fund to say it's not going to go to the police department, the fire department, the schools. Half of your taxes are going to go into a sunk fund to pay for the roads. How long will it take the building to pay off the road in front of it and the parking to pay off the road in front of it? 42 years for the building, 3,000 years for the parking. Did y'all ever see an American road last 3,000 years? Yeah. City after city has this problem. The other thing is, we just said, who's got a car? Just grab the census information. All of this stuff is out there. This is the households with no car, not in Portland, but in Marion County, Indiana. Households with 1 car, 2 cars, and 3 cars. The perception that everybody has a car isn't true in the data. 50% of the population has 10% has no car, 40% has 1 car. So 50% of the population has 1 car or less in Marion County, Indiana, and inside the bus corridor, it's 60%. So not everybody has a car. Why are we requiring 2 parking spaces per residential unit, particularly inside the bus corridor? Seems unbelievably stupid. So that's a long way to get to a joke. When we got done, the city was like, oh yeah, we probably should change the zoning code. They had this data sitting right there. So finally, one of the points I want to give you is how do you measure success going forward in your plan? This is Rancho Cucamonga, California. I love saying that word. They're outside in the Inland Empire, outside of Los Angeles. When we're doing the data, this is what the Inland Empire is. So think of this as a quadrant of Atlanta. They have 4.6 million people and 27,000 square miles. We're all on the East Coast illiterate about the West Coast. I was too. What blew my mind is when Josh put this down on a map, it's the same population and area as South Carolina, an entire state, is just a quadrant of Los Angeles. If you think Atlanta's big, go check that place out. What was kind of wild about this is their model, very similar to you, but this is just a city, not a county. Notice how it's a shag carpet effect. Here's their downtown. As a metric for your downtowns, for your areas that you grow up out in the county, if you're going to have a core area, this is the footprint of their downtown to the whole city. This is its property value to the value of the whole city. This is a ratio to start with. This is not a good model. This is somebody doing bad. It's a 1 to less than 1 ratio. You need to have a more potent value to the footprint that it takes up. Let me show you a different example. So they're 1 to less than 1. This is back to Brevard. This is a 1 to 7. And Asheville's actually a 1 to 9 now, but back when I did this, it's 1 to 6. Start with 1 to 6. Aim for that. You need to have a potency of development by any means necessary for the land area that it takes up for it to be punching above its weight. So their downtown right now is worth $400 million. What they did is they allowed their suburbs to grow up, and they never focused on letting their downtown grow up. If they did, they'd have a $4 billion downtown if they just let the downtown do its thing. So we started their comp plan process and said, go for it. You've got a planning team. You all have them here. So they assembled some buildings. Do this as part of your exercise. Figure out how to grow your potency and then measure what its return's going to be. So here's where you are and here's where you're going to grow into. So basically, they only messed with 11% or 12% of the real estate. This isn't to say that your neighborhood's going to get it downtown. This is to say, where do we put it and how do we get it done? But they grew $2 billion worth of value by just messing with a small amount of land. It punches way above its weight. And finally, I want to close about equity. We do a lot of work with taxation, and you really need to understand the strings that were put in place, the decisions that were made, similar to the choice that was made with the stormwater. 1934, redlining was adopted. I don't know if y'all know redlining, but redlining was our way of changing mortgages from 7 years to 30 years. Let your mind wander for a second of what it would be like with your own home mortgage being at 7 years. But we were in a depression, so they wanted to get more money into people's hands, but only certain people. There were these maps called HOLC maps. Green is good, blue is okay, yellow was declining, and red was deemed hazardous. You were hazardous as a neighborhood by your infiltration of immigrants or your black population, period. And they drew colored maps in all of these cities across the country. And basically folks that woke up in their neighborhood, if it was redlined, could no longer get a mortgage until 1968 when it was deemed unconstitutional. So when you look around at cities and you see neighborhoods that were essentially locked in time, this is how we pulled the money out of it. I'll give you an example. This is Kansas City, Kansas. I can tell you that redlining happened right across that red line right there. You cross Troost Avenue in Kansas City, notice how it takes a haircut when you go over. So sure enough, east of Troost was heavily redlined, and today, if you apply the red line, and remember, we stopped doing this before I was born. And you can see today, green line neighborhoods have more value than blue line neighborhoods, have more value than yellow neighborhoods, than red line neighborhoods. This is happening in every community that we look at the analysis and look at the math. And the pushback that I get from people is like, well, we stopped doing that. It's like, well, have you really checked? So after the murder of George Floyd in 2020, my city and my county both adopted reparations resolutions. This is where I'm turning from a consultant to an activist, because I know my community, I want to hold them accountable. So it was all over the New York Times and whatever, that isn't this awesome, Asheville's doing this, and I knew they weren't going to do a damn thing. So our company, we volunteered to do an analysis of my community because of the history of redlining in Asheville. So, it starts with race. This is a race map of Asheville and Buncombe County. This big hole right there is the Biltmore Estate. Many of you have been there. When you go there the next time, drive around Biltmore Forest. Drive around that neighborhood that was essentially a Vanderbilt subdivision built on the side of it. It's 99% white. When you cross Hendersonville Road, it turns into the city of Asheville. This is the Shiloh neighborhood that's predominantly black. Sidney Powell lives in Biltmore Forest, or used to live in Biltmore Forest. Y'all know Sidney. This is my friend Reggie. So here's Reggie's house, here's Sidney's house. Sidney's house is nothing to write home about, it's just a ranch building. So let's look at the data. Here's the land value per acre. So this checks out. This looks cool. Looks like it should, the way that it should look. Her land is worth more per acre than Reggie's is worth. But look at the building value per square foot. I took this to my assessor and I said, Mr. Miller, you need to explain this to me. I'm trained as an architect. How on God's green earth is Reggie's house worth more per square foot than Sidney's? Then he starts with his biases. Well, she's got more square footage. I'm like, I didn't realize this was like toilet paper. It gets cheaper by the bulk, right? I'm like, she's got 4 bathrooms, Reggie's got 1. Secondly, he's going to be paying more taxes per acre. And here's the kicker. From last assessment to this assessment, his has jumped up way more than hers. And on her property card, she's renovated, and he hasn't. Do y'all know why this is happening? This is perfectly legal. This is baked into our system. It's baked into your system. This is the way that it works in Buncombe County, North Carolina. If you're lucky enough to buy a house for $325 or $225, it gets assessed at $225. If you buy a house of less value, it gets overassessed. If you buy a house of greater value, and if you're lucky enough to get that, you get a handy little discount. So I showed this to our county commissioners, and I said, we are giving a $7 million a year subsidy to the wealthiest people in our community on the backs of the poorest people of our community. The first rule of reparations is do no harm. That's the harm that we're doing. So read a law. This is the law in North Carolina. The true value of a house will be what somebody pays for it and what you buy it for. Our tax system, our value should match the market price. So here's a house in a low wealth community. Here's what the computer, so everybody's got a computer model that runs through their tax system. It's called a CAMA model. This is what the computer assessed it at. Here's what it sold for. So we actually have the test score right there. Had it not been for the sale, that individual would have overpaid, 16% more than what they should have paid for their government. Do y'all follow me? So when the assessor saw the test score, the assessor corrected it. That's cool. That works out. Here's another one. The sale price, the computer underassessed it. The assessor brought it up to 100. Looks cool. Let's talk about rich people for a second. So I have to change scales. So here's the wealthy person, what they sold. Here's what the computer assessed it at. If your child brought home a 50 on a test score, would you have a word with the child? So we pointed this out to the assessor. We're like, we're here for you. We'll work with you. We need to help you, but your computer is definitely wrong. Now, the assessor didn't really help us, didn't really want our help, and I'll show you what their bias is. So even with the test score right there, this is what they reassessed, the human reassessed that property for. If you think that this is an anomaly, it's not. The moral courage that individual to bring the property value up 1 whole percentage point. Boy, I need to give this guy a cookie. That's amazing. So that individual on the left, how many of that person and their neighbors does it take to subsidize one house in my community? Well, we ran the numbers on that. 5 people to subsidize that one house on the side of the mountain. What's amazing to me is we're using this kind of analog and not understanding where and who set up these rules to understand the damage. So we do these models. This is we showed this to our assessor, and I was like, Keith, look, you can just do a computer model, and you'll see that one person being screwed out there. You can correct it before that person gets hammered. That seems to be good governance. But here's another thing. This is my office, and if y'all were to walk across the street with me to Montford neighborhood where I live, notice how when you cross the street and get into that neighborhood, this one little part of the neighborhood shoots up off the map. So here it is where 2 houses are side by side. And there's a 200% difference in the value of the land change when you just cross a property line right there. I asked the assessor, I'm like, could you explain that to me? And he goes, well, that's right here is a different tax neighborhood code. I was like, wait, hold on a second, hold the phone. Inside my neighborhood, there's a different neighborhood code inside my neighborhood. He's like, well, there's 30 different neighborhood codes inside your neighborhood. Did y'all ever ask that question? So I asked the assessor, I'm like, who drew the map? He's like, well, I don't know. Now, I can tell you as a city planner, Montford Avenue is where the streetcar line ran. That's where all the rich white people were. Their help were a couple blocks away. That same rule and policy, these lines conspire to align to cause the same damage inside our community. Until we ask the question about them, you can't change the system. So back to Reggie's neighborhood, notice how all the neighborhood districts are level. And when you cross the street in the wealthy neighborhood, notice how you have 2 transactions and nothing else happens over there. That seems to be a misapplication of policy, right? So in the wealthiest, this is a great house, 16,000 square feet on 22 acres. Here's the tax bill in 2011. It's $4 million. And 10 years later, it's lost value to $3 million. Did you know that rich people are losing value? We need to help these people out. So this is the wealthiest neighborhood in my state, Biltmore Forest. 55% of the houses are losing value. We need to start an urban renewal program for the Chads and Cassidys of the world. They really need our help. That's a loss of $40 million of value in the richest neighborhood in my community. Back to harm. So Reggie's neighborhood is overpaid $1.5 million. Biltmore Forest is underpaid $4.4 million. That's 111 school teachers that we can't pay for because we're giving that subsidy to them. So just to wrap up, I know that's depressing, but you can't face the truth until you show the truth. And we take this as a badge of honor in our community. You know, my county commissioners don't like me for this, but I don't care because I want to hold them accountable. So what can you do? By the way, we ran Gwinnett County. You're not great, but you're not awful either. But this should be a straight line across your model. Everybody should be taxed the same. So there's a little bit of inflection here. You are overcharging the poorest 10% of folks, probably about 2 or 3 percentage points more than the richest. What's that? There should be a flat line. Are you an assessor? Okay. Okay. So your different areas are going to require different tactics. In your core areas where you have a different problem set than in your suburban areas, you have to think of them differently. Set a target. We'd recommend the 1:6 is a ratio. You want to plan areas to grow that value and concentration. You have to focus on that. Know the costs. Start having conversations about the cost of development. Know the cost of parking. Tony's brought that up. I've brought that up. Run the numbers on it. Be cognizant and conscious of what your subsidy is there. You have to do the right thing in your tax system and focus on talking about this with your county assessor and be honest about the decisions and consequences. Our approach is called geoaccounting. We're going to put your numbers on the map and let the numbers do the talking the way that your accountant would, and we're not going to judge. Your accountant doesn't care if you buy a boat, right? Your accountant cares if you can afford a boat. So make sure you can afford yourself going forward. We'd recommend putting the numbers visually on a map so everybody can see them. Also, I'd recommend Chuck's books, and thanks for letting me do some math.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. So now we are going to have some Q&A. Awesome. Let's give them a round of applause again. Thank you. Thank you. Awesome. Yeah. Okay. So we're going to take some questions from the audience. And Nick is coming around now. Don't think I'm going to jump tonight.
We could also repeat the questions too.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I think we're good.
So my husband is from Germany, and I'm a U.S.-born citizen. And when we moved to Swanee, our house to the point of the parking has like 6 separate areas where you can park. And it's like, we never had that in Germany. And when we did have a driveway, it was the permeable type. The problem in Gwinnett is it's formerly farm country, and the mentality of the people is farm and vast stretches of land. I've noticed that people from California, New York, New Jersey are coming in, and they think differently. But like in our neighborhood, in our subdivision, you know, people get upset if a car is parked on the side of the road and it's not in the garage or in the driveway. So the mentality here is still at least 15 to 20 years away from Oregon or where you're from. My question, though, is to you, and that is, you talk about value with buildings, and that's basically skyscrapers or high-value buildings like mixed use like we have in Swanee. But with COVID coming about, it seems like there's a mindset change where people prefer to really work from home, and they absolutely hate getting into the car and driving someplace. What are your thoughts on that?
You know, at the beginning of the pandemic, people said, well, this is the end of cities. We're going to be all sequestered. We have new technology. They said that when these things came out. They said it when the predecessors to this came out, phones that were connected to a wall, that would change the way that we live. You know, it's funny you're coming from Germany. How many pandemics did Germany go through? You know, like hundreds. Yet we still collect as humans. You know, we still get together as humans. A meeting with people is way more dynamic than a Zoom meeting. You know, we all sit through Zooms. There's so much lost in translation, in body language. You sit there and people don't respond well. This type of meeting is way more collective as humans. You can feel my emotion. You can see what I'm talking about. It's different. So I would just look at the span of human history. For tens of thousands of years, we've collected en masse because we're really good with each other when we work together. And that doesn't happen when you stretch out. And if you do stretch out, you still have to pay for the road, you still have to pay for everything else. Go for it. I mean, I don't care what your choices are, just make sure you pencil it out. And it's also back to, you know, I'm not an advocate for skyscrapers either. There's, if I can remember correctly, your Gwinnett County Mall was $800,000 an acre. And there's in Lawrenceville, there's this boot store that was like $2 million an acre, and it's a one-story building. For like 2 acres of that building, if you had 2 acres covered with that little building in downtown Lawrenceville, it would equal the entire 80-acre mall. So, you know, you can have potency with little buildings.
Other questions?
Okay, I asked this question at our last meeting because we're having different discussions. I've lived here in the county almost 30 years. I do have my planning degree, but I'm not a practicing planner. I'm not certified planner. Nothing bad about that. The question is that we've had here is that I've also heard a whole lot of anti-density things here. I'd like for you guys to address, and I think Tony did to a certain extent, was that how much traffic and congestion will density draw here? Because that's what people's opposition is that, oh, we're going to build density, we're going to have all this terrible traffic here. How do we sell it to the public here that that's not necessarily true?
Well, I mean, the data that I showed you, you're already dense. You know, you're double the density of Asheville. I can get around Asheville quite well. You all can get around Asheville quite well when you come to visit. You all have a park once attitude when you come to my downtown. And you'll walk an amazing amount in my downtown. I mean, just for fun, I mean, seriously, go to our website. We've got a whole page called Urban Mirror, and you can put any city side by side. Density doesn't necessarily connote traffic. It doesn't necessarily connote a hellscape of bumper-to-bumper cars, because you're taking more trips out of the system when people start walking around and using their feet, or bicycles or scooters. So by changing and being alternative with the trips, you can actually disperse that density, or disperse the load, if you will. So Portland, plenty of people on foot and getting around in Portland. I mean, Tony's an example of it, but they have the infrastructure and design, the habitat to allow that species to work. So I think that when you get hung up on a number, get hung up on a density or whatever, I even bristle at putting 1 to 6 out there, because people tend to like hang on to numbers as some sort of Moses delivered them to them. But I'm just trying to nudge you into a different direction. But you're already dense. You're denser than what I have, because your numbers have changed. Your county area hasn't. What's your population now, by the way? Yeah. So it's worse now.
And I mean, you also do need to do that work of providing ways for people to get places that's not driving. I think someone was telling me, that the events on the weekend here in Duluth are packed, and now we need more parking. Well, that's one way to deal with it, but 10 minutes away by a shuttle, there is virtually an uncountable amount of parking that I walked through today. So I think you can think outside the box of building places people want to go to, and then helping them get there. And some people are going to drive, but that's not a God-given right. And it does have costs to the community that they're driving to that are subsidized and ignored. And I think if we start to rethink about the cost that driving brings and try and recoup it, then you actually can fund those shuttles or other things to get more people into your downtown. It's people that spend money, not cars, right? So that's what you want to get, is more people here. And I think you can.
Joe, you just mentioned taking the trips out of the system and putting more people into the downtown areas. Have you done a impact analysis on health and more steps per day so people can close those rings on their iPhones? That affects spend, obviously it gets insured and things, it's a little cleaner to do it overseas, but have you seen any models here that look at that total cost of impact? Yeah,
there's lots of, when we first started doing this stuff 10 years ago, I mean, there's environmental benefits, there's health benefits, there's social justice benefits, there's all sorts of measurables that you could do. We've shied away from doing all of that because it can be overloading on an audience. I already dumped a bunch of slides on you. You can see how intense this is. Imagine if I had another hour or two to do health impact and another hour on environmental impact. It could go on forever. So we just focus on this one piece. But I'd recommend the book Happy City by Charles Montgomery. It's a kind of an awful title for what the book is, but it's an awesome book on the sociological and epidemiological impacts of urbanism, the serotonin that goes off in our brains, having a face-to-face meeting or meeting somebody on the street that happens. And that happens to me in Asheville all the time. I actually choose routes to try to avoid people because of my politics, I guess. But it's, there's effects that happen. And yes, you're right. You'll drop weight. You'll be more. Our bodies are designed to keep moving, and when we stop moving and become sedentary, that's where the issues start to come in.
I think we have time for 2 more.
Hi. So I have a question about the redlining maps from Kansas City and from Asheville. So you were showing how the formerly redlined neighborhoods had lower values per acre than the other neighborhoods. Like, for example, the downtown has the higher value per acre and also higher land value. So how do we not use that comparison to target these formerly redlined neighborhoods to increase the land value, to increase both the value per acre and the land value such that it incentivizes or it sparks displacement? How do we balance the two?
There's a good book that just came out called Just Action. Part of this is not taking a paternalistic attitude toward it, but looking at the forces that were inflicted upon these neighborhoods. I was talking with Dr. DJ about this earlier. The irony of what I showed you in that kind of J-curve, both assessors and appraisers get trained by the same institution, that assessors organization. So I'm a member of that organization. I'm not an assessor. But they all learn from that one source. There's no grad school for assessment. I mean, let that wash over you for a second. One organization controls our personal wealth, that's the appraisers, right? You get your house appraised. You want the highest damn appraisal you can get. There are appraisers that appraise black households at a lower value than white households. That's a known fact because they have biases. It's a lot of it the same practice that they learn from that same organization. On the flip side, the assessors overcharge those neighborhoods, and meanwhile the appraisers are undervaluing the system. It's a double hit. So the first thing you can do is learn, now that you know, be humble, and try to find ways to change that system, but at least make awareness to that system and hold the public officials accountable. We're not going to solve this easily. We just have to identify that the problem exists, the harm has been created, and we need to start putting a price on it. So that's what we're focusing on in Buncombe County, and actually 17 counties around Asheville now. We're also doing the work in Dallas, Fort Worth. There's going to be a lot more conversation about this, but start with the book Just Action. Also read The Color of Law if you haven't read that by now. Start with Color of Law, then get into Just Action. Color of Law is just unbelievably depressing, and Just Action is now that you know, what do you do about it? And there might be a lot of different actions. There's a great lesson in, I think he's a gentleman in Boston, going in and being a, gentrification can be good. That family is has the opportunity to sell their house at a higher value. They can now capture the wealth that's been pent up and pass that on to their kids or their grandkids, right? So we don't want to put a lid on somebody's ability to gather wealth. But if you're moving into that neighborhood and stimulating that problem, be a good neighbor. Take part in the community and the neighborhood activities. Ask for tax freezes or rebates in the neighborhood so folks that are there don't get displaced by the government action. There's lots of things we could do.
First of all, thank you for your work. It sounds really exciting, and their activism, so thank you for that. My question, though, hearing you talk about walking and everything, although I walk, I have a lot of friends my age who are baby boomers and aging out that really are physically not capable of walking, and they need their cars because the alternative is that they are at home and alone and depressed. How do you plan for that? What accommodations exist for that?
I think that is, it's certainly a very difficult question. I mean, I think that part of the answer there is building more places where people can be close enough to the services and the people that they need to help them. Because obviously, at some point, even people who are car dependent can't drive anymore, and then really you're
shouldn't
stuck,
drive.
right? Then you end up what?
Or shouldn't drive.
Well, yeah, I mean, then people. I mean, it happened. The woman who lives 2 doors up from me. We live in a walkable neighborhood, but she drove all the time. Her husband died. Then once they took her keys away, she ended up in a home. It's really sad. She's now in memory care. It's a period of months because this displacement from her community is what harmed her. So the AARP, is one of the biggest proponents of these policies because they recognize that it's not. First of all, remember, it's not taking away anyone's initial keys. If your current plan is that you drive to the store, that store is not going to go anywhere anytime soon. But how do we start from this point on building more places where people can age in place or can take other modes around? I mean, it's a process, like Joe said. It's not easy, but even to some degree also I mentioned like this smaller scale commercial, bringing things closer to you so that you have fewer trips that you have to make by a car, which certainly can reduce some of the burden of driving around. So I think like obviously not everyone can ride or walk everywhere, but at the same time, at some point, we all start out not being able to drive, and most of us end up in a point where we can't drive for some reason or the other, and we need to plan for both of those communities.
Check out age-in-place communities. On the AARP has done some phenomenal work gathering information there. And then it's going to be different in different places. Like my office is actually in the basement of an elder care facility. It used to be an old hotel, and it's right next to the Civic Center in downtown Asheville. Those folks, it's insane what they do up there. I mean, it's like a little bit like Little Miss Sunshine, what goes on the street with some of them. But there's some of them drive still, and those people are the rock stars of the building because they're driving everybody else around. But people are walking to the grocery store, they're participating on the street, they're walking up and down. A lot of them just sit on benches and watch people go by and people watch. There's a gentleman that lived up there. He's died at 96 years old. When he was 85, he came to me and told me that he built birdhouses in his closet upstairs. And he said to me, he goes, "Joe, I'm an old man. If old men don't have something to do, we die. I don't want to die, Joe. You need to help me get some birdhouses out there to people." And I grew up Roman Catholic. That's a whole lot of guilt to throw on me. And so I started pimping them out to all my friends. I must have gotten maybe 200 birdhouses built with Old Man Joe. We entered a birdhouse competition. I mean, it extended his life because he connected into the community, and he bumped into me at a conference, at a lecture that I was doing. So, it's like I hung out with Old Man Joe. I used to send, his daughter's an architect in Portland, and I used to send her emails. I'm like, "I'm hanging out with your dad." He's old enough to be my great-grandfather. So I think we have to think of community as we're all in this together. There's a diversity of people and needs. And what we've done with the suburban pattern is very monolithic. The old people are over there, the rich people are over here, the working class people are over here, the poor are over there, the groceries over here. Everybody's going to connect everything by car. It's unbelievably cartoonish.
I want to add one more thing too, is I think there are also motorized ways of transportation that are less intensive than the type that we use now. Cars are getting bigger and heavier, taking up more space. It's quite possible that even maybe there might not be something that's right down the street from someone 10 years from now that they can walk to, that they might be able to ride a small electric vehicle to do their shopping, right? So we're locked into this idea that like this one car is the solution and that we have to accommodate this everywhere. And I think we do have to break those boundaries and think about what we want to see 10 or 20 years down the line. That's the purpose of planning, and then setting that, making it legal to do that nowadays and incentivizing it.
Awesome.
I just want to close the one because I gave up my car, and my company has a car, but it's just basically a van that I bought for $6,000. But I use an e-bike, and it's in hilly, mountainous Asheville. It's increased my radius. Try it. Now the hard part is if you ride it around here, the physical infrastructure is so hostile to you that you don't have the ability to enjoy that opportunity. But e-bikes are going to change the way that cities are laid out because it's going to decrease effort and give us some mobility without crushing our joints and our knees and all of that stuff. Get outside of downtown Asheville and you'll see it fall apart real quick. We don't have a lot of sidewalks. And people just get in the street and kind of make do with it. And it tames the car because it is a lot of chaos in the environment. So, somebody just got hit 2 days ago on a bike lane in Asheville. So it happens, but it's going to take a transition of getting people out of the mentality that the car is the only thing that could be using these roads. And even Asheville's having a hard time with that, and we're considered a bike-friendly city. We're not nearly as great as Portland, but it's taken us a while to get there.
Awesome. As you can see, we can talk about this all night long. But in the interest of time, please thank Joe and Tony again.
Thank you.
Great questions, realistic solutions. Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you so much for participating tonight, and thank you for attending, spending a little bit of time with us. We hope you found your experience enjoyable. We hope you learned some things, and we hope you continue to remain engaged. But before you leave, I want to say thank you to TSW, thank you to Gwinnett County government leaders, employee, and thank you for coming again. Last, if you did not get a chance to sign in before you came in tonight, please stop by the table and do that. We really want to know who's in the room, and we want to be able to keep you updated. And if you did not get a chance to participate in any of the engagement activities, do that as well. We do have some upcoming events, daily cafes coming up Thursday, July 20th. That's going to be at Tequila Park Activity Building at 5 p.m. Then we have another daily cafe on Wednesday, July 26th, 5 p.m. at the Lawrenceville Senior Center. This is an opportunity for you to provide feedback and comments and discussions on what you want to see. Good night, and thank you so much again for coming.